Kansas City Chiefs, and that's been their wont so often tonight at a time when they desperate their wont, W-O-N-T.
In the ever-evolving world of sports broadcasting, certain voices rise above the rest, not just because of what they say, but how they say it. They stir controversy, challenge the status quo, and bring depth to games that millions watch. One such voice, a brash, brilliant, and polarizing figure named Howard Cosell. He wasn't your typical sportscaster. No, he was a cultural lightning rod, a man who transformed the press box into a platform for activism, intellect, and often scandal. Whether calling a boxing match or giving razor-sharp commentary on Monday Night Football, Cosell demanded attention, and usually got it. But his rise to fame wasn't without turbulence, and his fall from grace came just as dramatically. So what exactly did Howard Cosell say that made headlines and got him fired immediately? The truth is both more nuanced and more shocking than you might expect. But before we get to that moment, let's peel back the layers and trace the controversial journey that led there. Howard Cosell's story begins not in the press box or on television, but in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, where he was born, Howard William Cohen, into a traditional Jewish family. His upbringing in Brooklyn, New York, would shape the man who never quite fit the mold. His parents, Isidore and Nellie, emphasized education, discipline, and purpose, values that clung to him long after he traded law books for a microphone. The name Cosell itself was chosen during his law school days, a tribute to his grandfather, whose name had been altered at Ellis Island. It wasn't just a name change, it was a declaration. This was someone determined to carve out his own path and live life on his own terms. Cosell's early career followed the straight and narrow path of the American dream. He became a lawyer, served as a major in the U.S. Army during World War II, and seemed to be on a solid, respectable trajectory. But the fire burning in him was never meant for quiet legal chambers. After the war, he made a move that stunned friends and colleagues. He jumped into broadcasting, a field in which he had no formal experience and few connections. His first gig? Hosting a Little League baseball show on WABC radio. Unpaid, just a man and a microphone trying to make something happen. It wasn't long before he created Speaking of Sports, a daily radio segment that he not only pitched himself, but also funded with his own sponsor. This wasn't just about broadcasting, this was guerrilla journalism. Cosell was loud, analytical, and unapologetically opinionated. Everything sports radio wasn't at the time. While others played it safe, Cosell played it smart and bold. He didn't wait for approval. He created his own space, forcing the sports world to pay attention. And then came Muhammad Ali. The relationship between Cosell and Ali wasn't just a media pairing, it was a cultural force. Ali, then Cassius Clay, was brash, brilliant, and controversial. Most of the media couldn't handle him. Cosell not only embraced him, but he also publicly used Ali's chosen name when almost no one else would. It wasn't just respect, it was recognition of identity, humanity, and agency. Their interviews were electric. Ali with his poetic swagger, Cosell with his nasal-voiced comebacks and professorial posture. It was part performance, part mutual trust, and all revolutionary. But this bond was deeper than sound bites. When Ali refused induction into the Vietnam War and was stripped of his title, Cosell didn't turn his back like so many others. Instead, he defended Ali's right to his convictions, making it clear he wasn't just calling games, he was using his platform to speak truth, even when it was unpopular. This wasn't a one-off either. Cosell repeatedly backed black athletes who were ostracized for using their voices. After John Carlos and Tommy Smith raised black-gloved fists on the Olympic podium in 1968, the backlash was swift and severe. Cosell, however, defended their protest as a necessary, courageous act. This was a time when sports broadcasters were expected to be neutral, to stick to. Cosell refused. He didn't pretend sports existed in a vacuum. To him, athletes were people with thoughts, emotions, and rights, not just statistics to be dissected. He saw the connection between sports, politics, and society, and he made sure his audience saw it too. In a world that often told athletes to shut up and play, Cosell was amplifying their message. Yet that outspokenness also made him a target. He was seen as arrogant, too full of himself, and too willing to push buttons. But those very traits, his bluntness, his refusal to back down, were also what made him a giant. He wasn't interested in being liked. He was interested in telling the truth as he saw it. Even the way he covered games was different. Cosell brought a legalistic, analytical approach to commentary. He didn't just call plays, he explained the why behind them. That intellect made him polarizing, but it also made him essential. Whether you loved him or hated him, you listened, because Cosell made you think. Behind the voice was a man who had taken risks at every stage, abandoning law for radio, standing up for a boxer the country turned on, and using his platform for social justice before it was fashionable or safe to do so. He was the rare figure who managed to change both the medium and the message. And through it all, that original decision to change his name, to define himself, rather than be defined, echoed. Cosell didn't just report on cultural shifts, he helped create them. From his Brooklyn upbringing to his final broadcast, he lived with a conviction that sport was never just sport. It was a mirror of society, and he wasn't afraid to say exactly what he saw in the reflection. Howard Cosell wasn't just a sports broadcaster, he was a lightning rod, a force that divided living rooms and press boxes across America. With his nasally voice, articulate diction, and unrelenting candor, Cosell turned every mic into a courtroom, every broadcast into a cultural moment. Nowhere was that more evident than in his boxing commentary, where his voice became as iconic as the punches being thrown. His "Down Goes Frazier" call during the 1973 heavyweight bout between George Foreman and Joe Frazier is etched into the DNA of sports broadcasting. It wasn't just commentary. It was performance, history, and electricity all at once. But behind that drama was a man growing increasingly uncomfortable with the sport itself. Boxing, with its brutal exchanges and occasional disregard for fighter safety, began to gnaw at Cosell's conscience. He loved the chess match of the ring, the strategy, the personalities, but he couldn't stomach the human toll. That moral dilemma came to a head in 1982 during a fight between Larry Holmes and Tex Cobb. Cobb took a relentless, punishing beating for 15 rounds. The ref never stopped the fight, and Cosell, visibly shaken, said enough was enough. After that night, he walked away from boxing commentary permanently. That wasn't a stunt or a ratings ploy, it was a line in the sand. The same sport that had helped build his legacy had crossed a line, and he refused to be complicit. His protest echoed through the industry, raising real questions about fighter safety and the role of broadcasters in calling out what they see, not just entertaining what the crowd cheers. But if boxing gave Cosell his signature voice, Monday Night Football gave him a national platform unlike any other. When he joined the MNF booth in 1970, along with Frank Gifford and Don Meredith, he wasn't just calling games, He was redefining what sports television could be. This wasn't just football on TV. It was football as a primetime event, complete with theatrical tension, biting wit, and cultural sidebars. Cosell wasn't there to blend in. He was there to challenge, provoke, and elevate. His delivery, precise, dramatic, often dripping with sarcasm, was unlike anything viewers had heard. He brought a legal analyst's logic to the game and a Broadway performer's flair to the booth. Whether he was dissecting a blown coverage or musing about the cultural significance of the Super Bowl, Cosell brought gravitas to a sport that many had treated as background noise. He even had an unlikely impact on stadium culture. Thanks to his enthusiastic mentions of the snack during broadcasts, nachos exploded in popularity at sports venues. Only Cosell could turn a plate of melted cheese and chips into a national trend. But his sharp tongue didn't make for easy chemistry in the booth. He clashed frequently with former athletes turned broadcasters, often ridiculing their lack of polish or insight. His disdain for jockocracy, the idea that ex-athletes were automatically handed broadcasting jobs, was no secret. He believed in journalism, in preparation, and in language. And when he felt his colleagues weren't holding up their end, he let them know. On air. Sometimes in real time. That combative streak didn't stop at the broadcast table. Writers and media figures took every opportunity to fire back. Dick Young was relentless, branding Cosell a fraud and gleefully poking at his toupee. Jimmy Cannon said if Cosell were a sport, he'd be roller derby, cheap, noisy, and chaotic. But Cosell didn't flinch. He knew who he was, and he knew what he represented. Behind the scenes, producers found him difficult, even infuriating. He argued, he challenged authority, and he pushed every boundary. But what those same critics couldn't deny was the result: soaring ratings, cultural relevance, and a viewing experience unlike anything else on television. Audiences were split down the middle. Some tuned in just to hear him talk, others just to yell at their TV. But either way, they watched. He made people care. Whether he was calling a touchdown, dissecting a legal controversy, or walking away from a sport he loved out of principle, Cosell never played it safe. He didn't just tell stories. He was the story. His voice, his opinions, his ego, they changed the game. Cosell didn't just narrate sports history, he shaped it. And in doing so, he left behind a legacy that was loud, defiant, unforgettable, and entirely his own. September 5th, 1983, Monday Night Football was in full swing. Howard Cosell, as usual, was behind the mic, booming, brash, and in control of the moment. Washington's wide receiver Alvin Garrett, quick on his feet and hard to tackle, broke loose for a gain. And Cosell, with the kind of offhanded color commentary he was known for, let out the words, "That little monkey gets loose, doesn't he?" Instantly, everything shifted. What followed was not just controversy, it was a full-blown media inferno. Outrage exploded across the country. The Southern Christian Leadership Conference condemned the remark. Commentators, activists, and public figures piled on. Cosell, who had spent years building a reputation as one of the few broadcasters willing to stand up for black athletes, was now being labeled a racist. Headlines screamed scandal. Protests brewed. For a man who had spent a lifetime fighting the status quo, the moment felt like a betrayal of everything he had claimed to stand for. But was it as cut and dry as the headlines made it seem? Cosell pushed back hard. He said the remark had nothing to do with race. He pointed out that he frequently used "little monkey" as a term of endearment for his own grandchildren on the air. He also referenced other games where he'd used the phrase to describe white players of small stature. For Cosell, it wasn't a slur. It was a spontaneous, if poorly chosen, comment about someone's agility and size. And he had a powerful roster of people coming to his defense. Muhammad Ali stood up for him publicly. Jesse Jackson did too. Even Alvin Garrett himself said he wasn't offended. In fact, Garrett told reporters that he understood Cosell's intent and didn't believe there was any racial motivation behind the comment. But nuance didn't play well in the press. The narrative had already taken hold. And while ABC didn't fire Cosell on the spot, the writing was on the wall. The backlash was simply too hot. Advertisers were getting nervous. Network executives, already fatigued by Cosell's contentious personality and endless battles with colleagues and producers, were ready for an exit ramp. This moment provided the perfect cover. Officially, Cosell finished the 1983 season. But the decision had been made. There would be no return to the booth. Just like that, the most polarizing voice in sports broadcasting was silenced. But the question still lingers. Was Howard Cosell fired? Or did he walk? His supporters insist he left on his own terms. They argue he was growing increasingly disillusioned with the sanitized, corporate version of sports television that was beginning to take over. Cosell had always believed in the power of sports as a platform for truth, for justice, for cutting through the noise. But now, the booth was being scrubbed clean. No room for hard opinions, no space for controversy. The culture was shifting. Cosell didn't want to play along. On the other hand, plenty of insiders argue ABC was done with him anyway. His relentless ego, his clashes with producers, his disdain for colleagues, none of it made him easy to work with. He had become a liability, and the Garrett comment was the perfect reason to cut ties without sparking a public contract dispute. So, what was it? A quiet firing? A bitter resignation? The truth, as always, lies somewhere in between. Cosell himself never apologized. Not once. He never backtracked. He stood by his intent and resented the idea that his decades of advocacy could be wiped out by a single sentence taken out of context. To him, the reaction was more about politics and public relations than truth. And he made it clear that he wouldn't grovel for acceptance from the same media machine he had spent his life challenging. What made the situation even more complex was the timing. This wasn't the 1960s anymore. By 1983, the cultural climate had shifted. Civil rights awareness had evolved into a sharper, more media-driven movement. Words were dissected. Symbols mattered more. Cosell's blunt, old-school style didn't fit the moment. The world was changing, and Cosell refused to change with it. For some, that made him admirable. For others, it made him reckless. What's undeniable is that the little monkey incident was a turning point, not just for Cosell, but for sports broadcasting as a whole. It was the moment when language, race, intent, and media power collided in the most public way possible. It marked the beginning of a new era, one where broadcasters were expected to be more careful, more polished, more manageable. Cosell never returned to live sports broadcasting after that season. He published a final memoir, I Never Played the Game, in which he pulled no punches about the industry he once helped define. He called out hypocrisy, nepotism, and what he called the jockocracy of modern broadcasting. He remained defiant to the end, convinced he had been wronged, misunderstood, and exiled for telling it like it was. Whether you believe he was railroaded or reckless, misunderstood or misjudged, one thing is certain: Howard Cosell didn't fade away quietly. He left the stage exactly as he lived on it. loud, opinionated, and unapologetically himself. So, how should we remember Howard Cosell? As a bigot? No, his life's work stood firmly against that. As a blowhard? Perhaps he never shied from the spotlight. As a trailblazer? Absolutely. Cosell injected intelligence, drama, and risk into sports media. He spoke up for civil rights when others stayed silent. He changed how games were broadcast, and he refused to sugarcoat the ugliness behind the glamour. In many ways, he was the first unfiltered voice in a sea of polished talking heads. A pioneer who often paid the price for telling it like it is. Love him or hate him, Cosell changed the game forever. Howard Cosell didn't just comment on the game. He was the game for decades. His rise, his controversies, and his abrupt departure still spark debate today. Was he a victim of cancel culture before the term even existed? Or just a man whose time had run out? Whatever your take, one thing's for sure. When Howard Cosell spoke, the world listened. What do you think? Was Cosell unfairly targeted? Or did he cross the line? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of the most explosive moments in sports broadcasting history, give this video a thumbs up. Subscribe for more behind-the-scenes stories, and don't forget to hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes what you say can change everything.